Alrighty. So I think I've seen most of you folks at least once, a few of you a bunch of times.
Does anybody know who Carl is?
I write a fairly popular blog called The Market Ticker. Usually 3 or 4 articles a day, sometimes more, sometimes less, just depends on what's going on. When I get particularly torqued off, I tend to write a lot. When I'm a little calmer, I tend to write a little. Lately, there's been a lot to be torqued off about. So anyway, tonight's presentation is The World as It Is and Not As You Wish It Was. I was here to speak to the Fort Walton Tea Party about 13 months ago. I went back and I found the last presentation and actually went through it. And there's a couple of updates to some of the charts in there, and there's actually one that you will see in here that I lifted verbatim because it dealt directly with a prediction I made regarding our favorite thing called brosurance, otherwise known as Obamacare. All right, so let's look at what you've been told in the backdrop. We've had 100% return plus on the stock market since the lows in 2009, right? This is good. Stock portfolios are up. The recession supposedly ended in the summer of that year. That was from 2008. So in the middle of 2009, it was over. This is what we were told. We're now 4 years into a recovery. Of course, Obama takes credit for all of this. Health reform is a huge success. Remember, it's going to fix everything. And government deficits are shrinking as a percentage of GDP. And they're sustainable. And oh, by the way, housing is doing great too. All right, that's what you hear on Bubble TV all day long. All right, well, the first one's true. Stock prices are way up, but debt among those same companies is much higher than it was before. So if you're going to take a look at stock prices, right here, the little blue line, and you want to know how dangerous that is, you have to take the assets of the corporations and subtract off their debts, right? Because if something goes wrong, you got to pay off all the debts, and then whatever's left is what the shareholders get, right? That's shareholder equity. This is basic finance. Well, that's this purple line, okay? And see, this is where we were in 2007, and the purple line was about here. We're now higher on price, but lower on tangible actual assets. And we're also higher on price and lower on assets than we were in 2000 on a ratio basis. So, yes, prices are higher, but the leverage is higher, and the amount of danger you are taking being in the stock market is higher than it was in the summer of 2007. And we know what came after that.
Well, it was tighter.
Yeah. Okay. Yes?
But, you know, is that, are those asset prices, are those book values, are those...
Oh, no. Tangible assets are just that. Property, plant, equipment, things that we can put hard numbers on.
But I work for a major corporation. If we had, we owned land that the corporation owned for 100 years. It was on the books, but they paid for it 100 years ago. And we had equipment that was depreciated down to zero that we were still using.
I understand.
If we had to replace all that stuff, it would cost you a heck of a lot more than what our book value was.
Oh, absolutely. There's things missing out of all of these statistics, okay? That's one of the things that's missing out of those statistics. The other thing that's missing out of the statistics is we have how many companies that have negative earnings and no hope of them ever being anything else, okay? So their ratio is infinite because they have no assets. So we have to, this is not an absolute measurement, it's a relative measure of risk. Okay, what I try to explain to people, I had a guy that got to look at this chart from one of the big investment banks, and he called me. He looked me up on the phone and he called me. And he says, that can't be right. Yeah, blah, 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 blah. He goes, cash on the balance sheet. I said, yeah, debt on the balance sheet. Higher than it was in 2007. But buybacks. I said, yeah, that raises the amount of leverage in the system. Guess what? More earnings per share, fewer shares, right? So same amount of earnings, more earnings per share. That also means that if you have a loss, you have more losses per share too, okay? It works the same way, right? The crank turns both directions. At the end of the day, I said, look, this is not an absolute measure of risk. It doesn't mean the market's going to crash tomorrow. It means that for every dollar of stock you're buying, you're paying more on a risk-adjusted basis than you were in 2007. That's all it means. It's a comparison. It's a relative valuation measurement. Doesn't tell you anything about what's going to happen the next week. All right? It just tells you how much risk you're taking on for what you're doing. Okay, this chart back from my last presentation, federal health spending, actual through 2011, which was the latest numbers I had. Guess what? That's still the latest numbers I have, because the updates are all estimates because of our wonderful Treasury Department that thinks that they don't have to actually produce any real numbers for like 6 months after the fiscal year closes. Okay. However, the current estimate for 2014, fiscal 2014, says that this little thing is going to be up here. All right. So yes, we had a year of flattening out, mostly because nobody hired anybody and didn't spend anything going into brosurance. But this chart is intact as of right now in terms of medical spending. There was a one-year lull. By the way, there have been several of them before. This is a curve fit graph. It's not an exact representation of every year. Okay? All right. How about economic growth? Everybody heard about the 4% print we had last quarter, right? That was, boy, oh boy, everyone was jumping up and down. Okay, not so good, folks. Again, here is GDP. There's that nice little tick upward there in the red line, right? That's that 4.1% number. However, the blue line is the amount of credit that was issued newly in the economy in that same 3-month period. Guess what? Every dollar of credit that you take out, you buy something with immediately. So if you want to know what the economy is really doing, you have to subtract all the newly issued credit back out of your GDP number. That tells you how much organic growth you're generating that's actually being created by people making things, not turning around and buying cars and taking out 9-year loans to pay for them. All right? When you do that, we've got this little problem. It's called, we've got a 30-year unbroken record of negative actual GDP advancement. Now, there is one bright point in last quarter's report, and that is, it didn't get any worse. We had a 4% print. You say, that's a really great number, except the amount of outstanding credit went up at exactly the same rate. So in fact, the actual economic progress was no better than it was the quarter before, even though the headline number was much better. Now, there is one bad piece of news with this, and that is all these numbers are 3 months in arrears. Sorry, the Federal Reserve releases them 2.5 months late. That's off the Z1 that comes out every 3 months. So I won't have fourth quarter numbers to update this for about another 2 months. At the end of February sometime I'll have it. But I suspect that the number's going to basically not move. That gold line, which is the one that matters, is not going to come back up over the positive cycle. In fact, my expectation is it's probably going to dip down a little bit. And that's simply because we continue to issue more and more credit to people. We're not actually generating jobs. And we'll get to that in a minute, because that's really the key to this chart. This is why this has happened. Okay? All right. Now, everyone talks about their personal situation, right? Drink out there's $2.75. Okay? My Coke was $1. I don't care how many dollars you have in your wallet. All I care is what they buy. Do you care if you have $100 or $1,000? Well, not really. If gas is 10 cents a gallon, $100 goes an awfully long way. If gas is $10 a gallon, $100 doesn't buy anything. So what we care about is what the money you earn buys, not how much money you have. So it's a relative measurement, and unfortunately this is the gotcha in floating rate currencies, which all modern monetary systems are, whether we like it or not. This is the way the world works these days. And this one's a little tougher to read because you have the shading, but this shading here is annualized income growth on a quarter-by-quarter basis. And this is as a percentage. So as you can see, in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s, even when we had the really high inflation in the 1970s, everybody remembers that, right? The Arab oil embargo, all the messes. We actually, Americans, we were doing pretty good. We were bringing in more money every quarter than inflation was taking away from us. We were making real economic progress. For the next 30 years, we have been losing ground. As of last quarter, we were falling behind at about a 4% annualized rate. So if you take it out over 4 quarters, it would be about 4%. The good news is It was 5.8 in the second quarter of last year. In the third quarter, it was 3.9. So it's less bad, I guess, but negative is still negative. And again, because of the credit issuance, my expectation is that you're not going to see a material change here. Wages have not moved up materially in the last couple of employment reports, and that's what would influence this to move in the positive direction. So I don't expect any material change in this when the next quarterly report comes out through the end of 2013. So basically, you're losing about 4% a year in purchasing power. That's the reality of it. Okay, that may not be what the government reports, but that's what the numbers say. All right, so how about employment? We all know the unemployment rate went way down last Friday, right? We were all told that, 0.3%. Nice decrease. All right, you're not unemployed if you're not in the workforce, which means if you give up, you don't count anymore. Isn't that convenient? So if you decide that there are no jobs, you can't find one, there's nobody hiring, you're not unemployed anymore. Something's wrong with that. I haven't quite figured out what it is, but this is what we keep being told by our favorite people on bubble media. And therefore you have this nice little blue line. This is the high point, right in the early part of 2009 for unemployment, which right at about 10%, okay, was where it peaked by the government's figures, their claims, all right? And as you can see, the participation rate fell during that period down to about 59%. Now, what is the employment participation ratio? That is the percentage of people between 16 and 64. When you're 65, you're eligible for Social Security, don't count anymore. And the percentage of those people who have a job, who actually have a job. That's what this number is. And this is the only number that matters in the employment report. You do not want the adjusted, the seasonally adjusted number. You want the unadjusted raw number. It goes up and down every year. You can see it, nice little squiggles. It's done it every single year that I've charted it, and it still does. Why? Because people get hired at some times of the year and they get fired at others. All right, that's normal seasonal variation. But as you can see, there hasn't been one iota of progress since President Obama took office. Not a bit. I don't care what he tries to tell you. These are not my numbers. This comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It comes right out of the government stats numbers. Yeah?
I'm a little confused now. Is the participation rate the people who are employed or the people who are employed plus the people who are
no, the participation rate is defined as the employment. It's okay. There's two sets of numbers in here. This is the employment participation ratio. Okay? Which is, because if you actually look in the report, you'll see a thing called the labor participation rate, which is a different number than this, but not materially different in size, okay, magnitude, but it's measured a little bit differently. This figure is the percentage of persons between the ages of 16 and 64, inclusive, that have a job, okay? It doesn't matter why you don't have a job, it just matters if you have a job, you're in that number. That is the percentage of persons of working age that have a job. That's the definition of that number. That number tells you how many people pay taxes. That's the importance of that figure. It tells you, well, you're not.
What's the red number?
The red line. That's correct. The red line. And as you can see in the 2000 recession when we had the tech wreck, that number took a big step down, and then it took another one during the 2008 recession, and it never recovered from either one of them materially. The interesting thing about this figure is that if you look at this on a longer term graph, if you go over to the St. Louis Fed site, they've got this data going all the way back into the 1950s and 1960s. This figure is back to where it was before women went into the workforce in the 1970s and 80s. Okay, so we now have two-income homes, but we have a labor participation rate that is essentially identical to when 90% of women stayed home and raised kids. And they were age 16 to 64, and therefore they weren't in the workforce, although they were counted in this ratio in the 1970s and 80s. Yeah?
2 points I'd like to get out. First off, this graph, I was just thinking, it would be good if you put on the number of Americans who were receiving welfare or food stamp benefits as a superimposition on this particular graph. Because that would belie the idea of the unemployment rate going down.
Well, the SNAP data is even more late than everything else. So part of the problem is that the latest SNAP data that's available is only through October. And getting it way back as I can for this is a little more difficult. So I do actually have a SNAP graph laying around somewhere, but I'll have to see if I can drop it on top of this. That would be an interesting thing to do.
Another thing which is more difficult, I've only done it personally myself. I did it for a while long before I met you, because I noticed that the savings rate in America it went negative in the late 90s.
Right.
For quite a while. I was looking at it and said, that can't be good. And instantaneously, it went from -2 to +2 because they changed the methodology.
Well, saving is defined by the government as anything that you do not actually spend on consumption. So if you are paying down debt, that counts as savings. This is the logic of your government at work. Okay? That's I don't know when that was changed.
It would be handy on some of these graphs as you go through the 2,000 years. Methodological change in how it's calculated.
Oh, there's data series, for example, consumer credit that I used to put out every month. I don't do it anymore because the Federal Reserve changed the definition of what goes into what buckets twice in 3 years. They destroyed the continuity of the data.
And they do that because they
Well, no, it generated huge spikes that make it impossible to run comparisons and have them mean anything. All right? So, I mean, it was just, yeah, it essentially destroyed its value to me as an indicator. It's something that I used to watch very closely. Now I don't even use it. Okay, so the truth about the labor force. We have all heard this, the common political lie. Americans are retiring. That's why we have so much budget trouble, right? Social Security, Medicare, pensions, the whole 9 yards. That's a lie. The truth, in September 2008, when the crisis hit, there were 234,360,000 to the nearest thousand people aged 16 to 65, from actually 16 to 64, because at 65 you're off the workforce. Today there are 246,745,000. That is 12,385,000 more. So no, America is not all retiring and going on Social Security and Medicare and destroying the budget. There are more people working now than there were when President Obama took office, of working age. Okay? So when you hear him say, but we've added 6 million jobs. Well, you did, but you added 12 million people. There's a problem here. All right. So why didn't quantitative easing and zero interest rates work? Because if they worked, that participation rate would have gone back up. Everybody would be employed, right? We wouldn't be having unemployment problems. We wouldn't have all these people on welfare. So why didn't it work? Short version, it never could have. Slightly longer version. If I cut your interest rate on a mortgage from 6% to 3%, you pay half as much interest as you were going to pay before, right? That's good for you, but guess what? Somebody bought the bond that was your mortgage. They get half as much interest as they were going to get. Okay? So for every dollar you don't spend on interest is a dollar I can't spend at the store because I don't get it anymore. So why did it appear to work in the first place? Why did you get this lift in housing and other places in the economy? That's due to this little quirk in how people actually buy bonds. When I buy bonds, I don't buy one bond. I don't buy one loan. Nobody does that in the real world, at least nobody except maybe you if you buy a CD at the bank, okay? But people that actually have portfolios of bonds, they buy a lot of bonds. They match against the duration of what they need to do. So for example, a pension fund that has a very long time horizon might have a 10 or 30-year portfolio duration, which means if it's a 10-year duration, 1/10 of those bonds roll off every year and get replaced by new ones. So your interest that you pay goes down by 50% immediately. The interest that I receive in my bond portfolio goes down by 5% in the first year immediately. That looks like a free lunch, right? The other 45%, hey, you can spend it. There's no impact on the economy. Oh, wait a minute. I'm going to take that 5% hit every year for the next 10 years. All we did was spread it out. All right? The next year, I get 10% less interest instead of 5. You still have 50% less that you pay, then 15, then 20. So the impact of this, the benefit, if you will, disappears over time. Now here's the bad news. There's no free lunch at all, because when you stop doing it, I still get hosed for the rest of the 10 years. All right? So the myth is that the economy will be so booming that you won't notice that you got screwed out of 40% of your interest in year 6 and 7. All right? Yeah, that's a nice idea, but the real world doesn't work that way. So this is the reason that quantitative easing and zero interest rates never could have worked. Never. Mathematically. There's no magic to it. But it's also why it's like snorting heroin, in that it feels really good when you first start doing it, because I see all the benefit immediately and the guy over here only gets screwed a little bit. The rest of his screwing comes later. Yeah?
Was that a result of Obama breaking the contracts, things he did with the...
No. This was a result of the federal government deciding that it was going to deficit spend, and Ben Bernanke essentially giving... Ben Bernanke essentially giving Congress the ability to have a drunken orgy of spending without having to pay any interest.
So that wasn't the General Motors?
No, that's an entirely different problem. That's another problem, and a serious problem, but that's not related to this. Okay? This, by the way, is why QE is ending now. This is the reason. It has nothing to do with the economy getting better. Don't believe the BS. That's a lie. The bottom line is that we are now 6 years into this so-called extraordinary experiment, and the interest rate bite on those bond portfolios is getting to the point that people can't deal with it anymore, especially the people that have to deal with it. Pension funds, insurance companies, the folks that hold those long-dated instruments. They simply can't take any more of this, which is why it's being shut off. It has nothing to do with what Bernanke thinks the economy's doing. Right.
Carl,
yeah.
Your analysis of that, the 50% savings for the borrower, the 5% hit for the lender in year 1, is that because you're assuming a 10-year laddered bond portfolio and only 10% each year? Okay.
That's right. And that could be, for some bond portfolios, it'll be 3 years, for some it'll be 5, for some it'll be 30. Okay? But depending on what they're holding and what their goals are. But the point is, they don't get the whole thing at once. Okay? But the other side of it is, when the policy stops, the damage doesn't stop until it rolls off. Just like it came on slowly, it goes away slowly. The same way. All right? And here is the other side of that. You can't do anything about that once that's occurred. Because if I sell the bond early, I take a capital loss. All right? So I can't get out from under it by selling that bond that was issued at the lower interest rate, because then that crystallizes the rest of the loss immediately. The price of that existing bond is discounted by the difference in interest rates between the current one and the new one. So if I do that, I just take the entire loss all at once instead of over the space of however many years are left. All right, so there's no way out of the box. That's essentially the bottom line. Okay, so now we've got brosurance, which is what I've dubbed Obamacare. I mean, come on, he's a bro, so, you know, we call it brosurance. Okay, the claim was that these were non-compliant plans, right? This is why we had to change them all, because they weren't real insurance. How many times has everyone heard this, right? This has been all over the television. This is Pelosi's favorite talking point. All right. Most of the reasonably priced plans on the exchange are EPOs. Who knows what an EPO is? Anybody in the room? An EPO is an insurance plan that pays zero if you're out of network. Ever. Period. You go in network or you have no coverage at all. Period. Enhanced Provider Organization. It's a new invention of the insurance industry, and the reason you've never heard of it is it didn't exist until Obamacare. There were HMOs, there were PPOs. This is a new creation. It's a Frankenstein monster that's designed to make sure that you only go to the places they want you to go, or you have no coverage and you get to pay for it all. So, no money, no treatment, unless you're having a heart attack, then they'll treat you. And for many families, this more than doubles their costs. And I'm going to show you why. Unless, about those signups. Turns out 60% of them so far are actually Medicaid referrals. In other words, you don't pay nothing. It's free. Well, not really. It's just free to you. Okay? Of the remainder, about 21 to 23%, depending on the state, I've gone through all the numbers at this point, from the ones I can get anyway, which is not all of them, are 18 to 34-year-olds. This is a major problem because all of the assumptions that were put together was that 40% of the signups would be in that age group. And if they're not, there's a huge problem with the funding model and how all of this goes into the actuarial tables and the amount of money that they have to charge you in premiums to not go bankrupt. The other assumption was that at least 3/4 of those 18 to 34 people would be healthy. In other words, no significant medical problems. They're basically subsidizing everybody else's insurance by buying something they're never going to use. There's no breakdown on how sick the 23% are. I can't get the data. I am willing to bet that more than half have serious pre-existing ongoing medical conditions. In fact, I bet it's well more than half. And if it is, this is a lot worse than it looks. And there's a reason the government's not publishing this data. Right? Nobody hides good information. Right? That's the first rule of government statistics. Most of the states' signups that are not Medicaid are getting subsidies. When you take the two groups and put them together, 90% of those people who have signed up for Obamacare insurance are not paying full price, if anything at all, for the premium. Now, you would say, well, if I'm one of those people, that means I win big, right? Because my premiums are cheap, and they used to be expensive. That's a win. Not so fast. This is off of the Obamacare website for Okaloosa County yesterday. This is the cheapest plan for a single 50-year-old guy. Moi. No, I didn't give them my personal information. It is $294. Notice this EPO thing here. EPO bronze, in little print. They don't put that in big print. There's a reason for that. So $300 a month and then $6,250 worth of deductible that you have to pay before you get anything at all from the insurance. And notice over here, primary doctor, specialty doctor, prescriptions, no charge after deductible, which means until you spend $6,250 out of your own pocket, you get absolutely nothing. So you spend $9,850 in 1 year before you get $1 worth of coverage out of this policy. If you don't have $6,250 and you go into the hospital, you don't get treated. If you don't have the money to pay up to the $6,250, you may as well have thrown the $294 a month in the toilet because you have no coverage until you burn up that entire $6,250. Isn't that nice? So, if you qualify for a subsidy on your premium, if you still have to have the $6,250 for the deductible. Now, the last time I looked, most people that are poor don't happen to have $6,000 laying around on their kitchen counter. So, this is no insurance at all when you get down to it. Okay? This is nothing. You bought a big fat zero. All right, so how about an HMO plan? We're going to go up the line because I had to go through 3 pages before I found this one. It's a little more expensive. $397 a month and a $5,750 a year deductible. That's not a whole lot different than $6,250 now, is it? Look at the great break, except now your total out of pocket's $10,514, which is actually higher. You'd think it'd be lower if you were taking on more of the risk, right? Wrong. This is an actual HMO. Hey, we know what those are. We've dealt with those for 20 years in this country. And there are now, you can go see a doctor for $75, a specialist at 10% after deductible. Again, if you get a referral, hope you got that $5,750 because if you don't, it ain't worth anything. ER, 10% coinsurance after the deductible. Again, fork up $5,700 if you go to the emergency room. All right. This they are very kind about this. After you spend 10, 5, 14, if the coinsurance gets you, you can only get hit up to about another $500 on coinsurance. So another $5,000 approximately of billed charges, and then they actually pick up the rest. So essentially, if you don't have $11,000, you don't have insurance. Again, here's the bad news. Let's say you get cancer, okay? You got to have that every year because that resets every December 31st.
Is that for an individual or
Yes,
for a family?
that's an individual.
Nobody can afford that.
Nobody can afford this. Nobody, this is right off their page. Nobody can afford this, okay? This is the midline plan that they're saying that 80% of the people that signed up for Obamacare, this is a silver HMO plan. This is a middle of the line, not a platinum plan. This is their middle offering. This is what it is. By the way, this covers wonderful things for guys like me. I'm covered for pregnancy expenses. You over there, you're covered for prostate cancer. I'm sure you're going to get it someday, right? Yeah.
Put this in the context of somebody who isn't making a whole lot of money. Pete and I both went to some of these Obamacare presentations, and the one I was at, some woman in the audience was complaining because at her income of about $30,000, she was going to have to pay a $300 fine, and she couldn't afford that.
Right, but see, there's a...
How is she going to afford the insurance premium?
Well, if your income is low enough, you will get a subsidy that will partially or completely erase this premium. It does nothing for the deductible. All right? Now here's the bad news.
There's a gap.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're like low income, you're covered.
If you're very...
Not quite rock bottom, but you're below a Medicaid threshold, you have...
If you qualify...
to pay the premium and no ability to go on Medicaid.
Well, no, if you qualify for Medicaid, none of this applies to you.
Yeah, well, that's...
Right.
That's the lower portion.
That's right.
Gap right now, which
In the middle.
in Florida, where you haven't covered, and a lot of other states have. Right now, between the very lowest stratum and before the point where you consider to have enough income to get subsidies to pay.
No, nobody has enough income to cover. I mean, look, the idea that you can come up with $11,000 for an individual, okay? If you look at the family plans and you put this together, it gets much worse. Okay, much, much worse. I mean, $5,000 is about what you're going to be expected to shell out. If you've got a $40,000 or $50,000 family income with a family of 4, there's not a snowball's chance. That's probably more than you have after taxes. Okay, I mean, there is not a snowball's chance in hell that you can pay that.
This is so depressing.
All right, it gets worse. You don't smoke, right? I hope not.
Well, just in here we do.
No, I hope you don't smoke. I hope you don't smoke. I hope you don't smoke because if you smoke, the premium's 50% higher.
That makes
Automatically.
no sense whatsoever.
Okay? Oh, it's worse. This is for 50, which is the lowest of the bracket that starts to get really bad. You know, you don't qualify for Medicare until you're 65, right? Okay? So I said, well, what if I'm 64? The year before I can go on the dole and pay my Medicare Part A and Part B, right? So I went back and I changed the numbers and I said, I'm 64. The premium is the mark of the beast. Really, $666 per month for the premium. Now, none of the rest of this changes, but I don't know about you, but you happen to have $8 grand laying around for health insurance premiums, plus another 5 if you actually have to use it. All right? And this is up the middle for a single person. This is real. Or this is not, this is real. Okay. So how about the Medicaid problem? Medicaid was supposed to reduce hospital ER visits, right? If we put all these poor people on Medicaid, they wouldn't go to the hospital as often, and that would mean that the system would save money and it wouldn't blow up. It turns out that was BS. There is now a large cohort study that, by the way, has been out for 3 or 4 years that's been buried and nobody's talked about it. It was out in one of the western states. They pulled a lottery. They took 10,000 people and randomly assigned them either to Medicaid or not. And then they looked at how often they went to the hospital and to the ER. And it turns out that the people that they put on Medicaid went to the hospital more often and went to the ER more often than the people who didn't have Medicaid. So the states that took the Medicaid expansion, fortunately not Florida, at least not yet, are going to be destroyed, because that expansion up to 140% of the federal poverty level is going to ruin them from a budgetary perspective. The bad news is that even for states that didn't, like Florida, when you've got 60% of the applicants under Obamacare going directly into Medicaid anyway under the standard state programs, it's going to trash our budgets. All right, because that is highest cost care, period. And oh, by the way, the doctor does not have to see you if he doesn't like the amount of money that Medicaid pays him, because he can just say, I'm not going to take any Medicaid patients. All right, so we've heard a lot of people say the economic impact ain't going to be all that bad. The CNBC guys have been out on this. It's been the rolling deal for a little while now. It's true for this year. Because remember, Obama illegally waived the employer mandate for 2014. So if the 7% penetration, which is about where we think it's going to be, if that holds up, we don't have the numbers yet, but if it holds up, the average family will add about $1,000 in actual medical spending. And that's for the people who don't get sick. People get sick are screwed. But the people who don't get sick, if you look at it on an average basis, probably add about $1,000 to the average family spending. That's about $15 billion not spent on consumer goods over the next year. And you know what? That's a tiny number. It really is. So when the people run around on the bubble TV and tell you, oh, this isn't going to hurt the economy, for 2014, they're not lying. It's a minuscule percentage. Just for perspective, we have almost $12 trillion of consumer spending in the economy every year. Okay? So $15 billion ain't all that much. However, next year, the employer mandate comes in. And that 7% goes to 100%. And the avoided consumer spending is $214 billion, which is about 1.8% of gross domestic product. To put some perspective on this, the last 4 quarters on a running average basis had an expansion of 1.95. In other words, all of it. Okay? All of it. Yeah. But you could argue medical spending is part of GDP. It counts, right? So we're just taking money out of one pocket, putting it in another, everything's fine, right? Except medical spending is not discretionary. You don't choose to go to the emergency room. You don't choose to have your appendix out. For the most part, medical spending is mandatory spending. And when the price goes up, you don't spend it on things that you would choose to spend it on. So we've had no effort to rein in any of the monopoly practices that are the reason that medical spending in our country has gone from 4% of gross domestic product to 18%. Almost a 6-fold increase in the last 40 years.
In terms of inflation, it's only 0.65%.
Oh, well, you can claim whatever you want in terms of inflation, but I look at GDP and I say, well, as a percentage of the economy, that's the part that matters, right? Well, that's my point of view.
Carl, as far as the monopoly price,
yes.
I contend that that's because of third-party payer. If you look at
to some degree, it's not just that. It's government guns being used to exert force across the board. I'll give you one example that has nothing to do with third-party payer, okay? Woman in Phoenix gets stung by a scorpion, all right? Has a bad reaction to the sting, gets taken to the hospital, they throw 2 vials of anti-venom in her, bill her for $60,000. All right, that anti-venom happens to be made in Mexico, a couple hundred miles south. It can be bought over the counter in a pharmacy in Mexico for $100 each. So she paid $60,000 for something that should have cost $200. Right. If you get in your car and drive to Mexico and fill it full of scorpion anti-venom at $100 a vial, when you come back across the border, you go to prison for 20 years for illegally importing that drug. All right? The hospital could not have possibly gotten away with charging $60,000 except by preventing you from doing that.
Absolutely.
All right.
That is a microcosm on the big calculus.
But it's
if you had to pay for these yourself, you would put the pressures on to open the...
But it hasn't, but there hasn't, I would argue...
I can give you just...
No, I understand what you're saying.
Eye surgery, cosmetic surgery.
Right.
results are dramatically improved, costs dramatically different, you have to pay yourself. You make the choice.
But even there, we have the same sort of problems. But it's true, though, that the third-party payer problem is real, okay? But I don't think you can divorce that from the government force argument across the board. I think it's all part of the same piece, all right? Just as an example, I ran an internet company in the 1990s. It would be illegal if all of you were internet company executives for all of us to sit in this room and talk about how much we're going to charge for internet service. You go to prison for 10 years for just having that meeting, okay? That's a violation of the Sherman Act. That is a black letter felony. We all go to jail. Insurance companies and medical providers do this every single day. There is, in fact, a board that meets every year to set Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement rates, and they do exactly that. All right? Practices that are illegal in virtually every other line of business and are felonies, black letter $1 million fines, 10 years in prison, done every day, every hour. You can't get a price for a procedure in a hospital before you have it done. You can't get away with that in the local car dealer. Okay? How much are you going to charge me to fix my transmission? If he won't tell you, somebody goes to jail. All right? He says it's going to be $1,000 and it's $5,000, he goes to jail. All right? Try that in a hospital. All right? Where is the difference here? It's all the ability of the government. They've given people the ability to use their guns to extract money from your wallet. All right? I mean, that's the reality of it. All right? Now, it gets worse. Because you thought that the screwing was going to end with your wallet. Oh no, it's not. There's a thing in the law, which I talked about when it was first written and nobody paid any attention to, called risk corridors. Risk corridors say that if the insurance company is wrong about how much it costs to provide this care, they bill the Department of Health and Human Services, and Health and Human Services has to fork it up.
And more likely,
if it's the other way around, they have to pay Health and Human Services.
the demographic profile of the people who sign up, that's more or less a foregone.
Well, yeah, but basically what this means, right, but the next year, the premiums go up. But for that specific year, when they're out of boundary, they don't eat it, you eat it. We all eat it, it goes on to the deficit. Then the premiums will go up. So what's going to happen here is that first you're going to get a huge whack on the deficit from this back billing, and then the premiums are going to go up 50% because the uptake is not going to be there.
Not only that, but they're going to figure those premiums out on the first quarter this year.
Right. Yeah, because those get filed in June.
And announced in August.
Right. That gets filed in June and they're out in August. So yeah.
Is that the bailout they're talking about?
Right. That's the bail. This is the bailout that you've got a few people, including Rubio, talking about trying to kill. That's the one that led Blue Cross to say that if you kill the risk corridors, if the Republicans do that, that you destroy the insurance industry and you will have single payer within a year. They sent that to all the Democrats. All right. So the bottom line question, the one that nobody's asking, but the political problem we have and what we have to deal with, do you want an economy that has almost $1.05 spent keeping you out of a pine box? Because we're there now. And it used to be 3% of our economy. Now it's 1 in 5.
20%.
And if we don't fix that, it will destroy this country's economy. It's already doing it, and it's only going to get worse.
You'd think the Democrats would be voting to get rid of the risk corridors so that then...
No, the Democrats are just as much in the pockets as the Republicans are on this. This is the problem with trying to find political solutions to this issue. Both the Republicans and Democrats are tied to the medical industry. Neither one of them are going to do anything to pull a rug out from under these guys, and here's the reason. If we were to go from 18% of GDP to 3%, let's say that you were to enforce the Sherman and Clayton Acts against the medical industry. That's all you'd have to do. Price fixing is against the law. You do it, you go to prison. Prices would collapse by 80% in an afternoon. All right? What happens? You have an instant depression. Why? Because about 15% of the economy disappears. Now, it wouldn't stay disappeared. It would show up in other places quite quickly. All right? But until that took place, GDP would drop by 15%.
That 6 months would be tough.
The next 6 months would suck. And then it would be over. and things would improve. We'd also be the most competitive nation for labor and industry on the planet if we were to do that 6 months later. But you'd have to take the recognition that there's going to be a intentionally caused economic depression in order to fix this. Good luck getting either political party to even talk about this. There were some people that were elected in the legislature last cycle that I and a few other people thought would bring this into the Hill and bring this into discussion. Ha ha ha! Door got slammed the minute they actually took the oath of office. So, and by the way, they know the numbers because it's been laid out for them in great detail. This is a project I've been working on since the whole health reform thing started. And this is, the numbers are what they are, okay? So how about the Fed and monetary policy? Guys, QE's over. I know, there's a lot of people running around saying, no, 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 as soon as the stock market tanks, they're going to come back in, they're going to double it, there's going to be, nope, it's over, guys. They're trapped. It's not over because they want it to be over. It's over because the impact on the bond investors is no longer able to be swallowed. They don't have a choice. They have to back off. I don't know if any of you have heard the stuff that's come out of even Bullard, who is very dovish. He's basically said, nope, we're done with this. The taper is still on, even though we had a terrible employment report on Friday. All right, so this is not voluntary, folks. Monetary policy is broken. They ran their little con game. They thought they could get a robust recovery and hide the cost of QE over the space of the next 5 or 6 years. It didn't work because it couldn't work. Hey, Bernanke got to run his grand PhD experiment on us. Guess what? We all ate it.
Well, will they start, will it be the 10 million a month, or will they dramatically increase that?
No, I think you're going to see the taper at the pace that they've set. 5 to 10 every meeting. Okay, it will be over by the end of the year, by the end of 2014. That's my prediction. It's going to be over by the end of 2014. And my guess is that monetary velocity will not pick up and inflation will not pick up because what we have is a deflationary environment right now. Everyone says this is hugely inflationary. They're wrong. There is no velocity of money. There is no lending. And the reason there's no lending is because there's no interest to be earned. So why in the hell would you lend out your money? Okay. I mean, why would you take the risk for no return? Doesn't make any sense. So there's a trap here. The problem is that what they have to do is pull systemic liquidity out of the system. And as soon as they do that, the stock market goes in the toilet. Because all it's floating on right now is that excess liquidity. So this is the corner they've backed themselves into. They think they have a way that they can get out of this and thread the needle. I'm not a believer. I don't buy it. You don't blow bubbles and then just slowly let the air out. It doesn't work that way. Somehow balloons always find a pin. That's my one sentence answer to that sort of question. Yeah.
Carl, does anybody know, is the 5 to 10 billion, ultimately the $85 billion per month of QE that the Fed's buying bonds, as that dries up, does anybody know if there's enough money that still wants to or needs to buy bonds to fill the void when that big, I mean, at some interest rate?
Yeah, here's the
that void get filled.
Yeah, here's the thing. The expectation and prediction is that long rates are going to shoot the moon when they do this. Okay. Remember that a 10-year Treasury trading at about 5% is considered normal, between 5 and 7, all right, on a long-run basis. That short rates somewhere between 3 and 5 are considered normal. That the normal spread between those is usually about 200 basis points. That's a historical average. We played this game with financial repression after World War II, and we got away with it because everybody else had been blown into dust, and we were the only people that had any manufacturing capacity left in the world. That's over unless we want to start a nuclear war. So, we're trying to play the same game on a different field, and it didn't work because it couldn't. Is there demand there for that? Sure. Where do people go when they're scared? They go into the bond market. Where do they, what's happened here? We've pulled back and yet 10 years still under 3. Why? Nobody believed that was going to be the case. Everybody thought we'd be up 3.5 by now. Well, it's not happening. It's not going to happen. And as the liquidity comes out and companies actually have to earn money instead of machining their earnings by buying back stock and paying dividends with borrowed funds, you're going to see multiples collapse. And as multiples come in, That takes more liquidity out of the system. What's left is there's plenty there for the bond market. Now, issuance, I mean, there's a balance here between revenue and taxation and, and gross issuance from Treasury and the size of the budget. We still have a problem here that we have to deal with on the federal budgetary side that we haven't even begun to talk about, all right? But in terms of the, a policy mistake kind of situation, I don't see the risks on the crazy high inflation and crazy high bond rate side. I just don't see it. I don't see the economic conditions that create that. I mean, if you had a huge pickup in hiring, the participation rate went up by 3 or 4 points, yeah, then I get worried, okay? Wake me up when we actually see the participation rate start to move higher on a consistent basis. We get a 12-month trend or a 6-month trend that puts that participation rate up a couple of points. Then I start to get a little more concerned about this, because then you're going to see wage pressures. But there's no indication that's going to happen. If anything, the data says it's going the other way. So I don't see it. Here's the thing. So this year, lots of volatility. You could take half off the stock market right now and still be within historical norms in terms of leverage ratios. That doesn't mean it's going to happen. It means you could. All right? That's not crash valuations. That's still within the normal band. Okay? That tells you how overvalued things are right now. Now, what 1999 tells us is that you can have things that are that crazy, and in the first 3 months of 2000, the NASDAQ went up by 50% again. Okay? So you got to be careful here, because manias have this funny way of going on for a lot longer than anyone thinks. All right, so the idea that this means that everything's going to go down the toilet tomorrow, no, it does not. It just means that you're in a very dangerous place right now. And that means that the swings are likely to get more violent as the year goes on. You cannot count on the medical system. If you currently are dependent on the medical system, you are in big trouble, period. That means get healthy now. And oh, by the way, what the government tries to tell you about what you ought to be eating, they're lying. They have been for 30 years and they know it. But I could spend a whole nother talk on that. And get organized and do what you can politically. The biggest political fights and the places to go with pensions and benefits is in the local systems. Detroit is not an isolated case. And by the way, there is a problem here. I've looked at it. It's not critical at this point. But anyone that thinks that the public service people here or anywhere else, we can keep those systems as they are and not fix them, including cuts to current pensioners, you're wrong. We can't. It has to be done. The fastest and best way to do this is to fix the medical system. But if we won't take that on, everybody's going to have to get screwed to the same level that the private sector people do. I know it's tough, but politically it has to happen. Yeah?
Tomorrow or Thursday, if it's Thursday, I'm going to it. If it's tomorrow, I'll miss it. But there is a committee meeting in Tallahassee discussing public employees' health care, either tomorrow or Thursday.
They have to be thrown off the system and into the same pool as everybody else.
Yeah.
That's what has to happen. The only way you can fix this is for everybody to be in the Shark Tank, so when they start biting everyone, we all have a reason to rise up and do something about it. All right? I mean, unfortunately, that's the only way this is going to get solved. All right? Okay. Huh?
The problem you have, though, is just look at Detroit, okay? Detroit had all these problems. They've had them for years, and all the politicians, everybody knew it. And they still wouldn't fix it because they believed if they voted to fix it, they'd be out of office. The thing that the public employees have is they lobby and they...
I know.
And they're amongst the few in all the places that get time off from work to vote.
I know, but you know what? Look at ultimately what ended up happening to them. They're going to get 15 cents on the dollar. What you put to the people in Tallahassee and everybody else in the local system is, do you want half or do you want zero? Okay? Because if you keep pushing for this, you're going to get what Detroit got. Because that's how exponential systems work. That's the math.
Oh, I understand the math.
Got an example now.
Yeah, you got an example. Somebody got hosed by pushing that argument too far. Okay, so I mean, there it is. All right, How much time do you got? 2014 is going to be difficult. My opinion, the best place you spend your effort is primarying people. Once you get to the general, we're talking about 2 heads on the same snake.
Yeah.
All right? Unfortunately, for us here in this county, good luck. I don't know anybody that's talking about taking on Miller in the primary, so.
Oh, there is one.
Is it?
Yeah, John Trout.
Okay, well, the only way that you're going to solve this problem in Washington is at the primary level. I heard somebody's after Boehner, which, thank God, all right? But I think that's, once you get to the general, you may as well stay home or vote for Beelzebub. I don't see the point beyond that. Personal debt, get out and don't take any more on. And let me add something to that. Those of you that have kids either in or going to college, do not endorse or support them going into debt for school. If they do it on their own, they do it on, look, adults are entitled to do whatever they want, okay? We're talking odds here, not outcomes, odds. There are ways to avoid it in most fields. Not all. If you got to gamble, you got to gamble. But in most fields, there are ways to avoid it. And to the extent that you can, you damn well should, because if we get an economic dislocation and the job market doesn't pick up, you're going to be you're going to be in that tank of the statistics that say 60% of the people coming out of college these days with college degrees don't find work in field. How are you going to pay the loan back? All right, I mean, that's all it is, right? You know, I mean, you know, if you're a valedictorian or something, you know, hey, there's always exceptions, right? If you're going to be an aerospace engineer and, you know, your field where you're reasonably sure, but I have a friend of mine that just went through this, just got a master's in a field that she thought was absolutely solid. She can't find a job. She graduated with a 4.0, master's. Can't get a job in field. Okay, so it can happen. All right, 2014, ignoring Obamacare and keeping your old coverage if you can, if they haven't thrown you off, is likely to be the best choice. It's what I'm doing. The hell with them, they can find me. This may change in 2015. It probably will, okay? But for this year, the policy that I have now, which hasn't been canceled yet, has a $1,000 deductible. Why would I buy brosurance? Okay? I mean, come on. Do I look stupid? All right? It is otherwise a catastrophic policy. It doesn't cover routine stuff. I have to pay for that out of my pocket. But if I end up in the hospital, it's a $1,000 deductible. That's pretty reasonable. All right? I can't replace it with anything like that now, so why would I? I'll pay the small fine this year and I'll revisit the decision next year. Okay, and then we'll see how bad the mess is next year with the premiums too, which is one thing that I have heard a lot of people talking about is take the fine, don't pay it. Make sure you don't have a refund coming back because the IRS currently has no means to enforce that. Be very careful with that strategy. Remember, retroactive tax law changes are legal. The Supreme Court has ruled them legal. And if a lot of people do this and all of a sudden there's $200 or $300 billion that they can go collect by changing the law and making that attachable and accessible, what do you think the odds are that they won't just before the statute of limitations runs out? All right, so be very careful with that strategy. But you know, if you're thinking of using it, and there are a lot of people that are talking about it, I've just said, you know, look, I don't trust the government as far as I can throw them. The idea of having a tax lien that they can only collect by refunds sounds great right up until they change the law. Then all of a sudden it's not so great, especially when you got 5 years of it and they come after you for 15 grand and you don't have it. So, you know, I mean, you always got to keep everything in perspective, right? Predictions. Stock market is not priced in for 2015 that virtually all of last year's GDP growth is going to go into medical spending. It will, and it will do it this year. That's going to generate winners and it's going to generate losers. More losers than winners. There will be no real improvement in hiring. If you're looking for that participation rate to pick up and for the job market in general to improve, I think you're wish casting. The Republicans, unless they blow their own heads off, and by the way, they're really good at doing that, probably get the Senate back. Okay? What that means as a practical matter is a different question. but I think they get the Senate back this year. None of it matters if we don't get our fiscal house in order, and there's no evidence that anybody's going to do anything about that at a state, federal, or local level. And therefore, get ready for a very long, hard reign. Because that's what we got. And the worst of the impact from Obamacare and everything related to it isn't this year, it's next year. So that's the year that you're actually going to see the economy get whammered by this. Now, of course, you know, a few more executive orders and we'll change some more things around and make some more exceptions. You have to expect that there's going to be some more of that too.
That'll make it worse.
There will be more of that and it'll just make it worse. That's right. That's it. You can find daily commentary, market-ticker.org, and I'd be pleased to answer any of your questions that you might have.
Well, besides that, Mrs. Lincoln, how'd you like to play?
Well, I didn't say it was going to be cheery. I just said I was going to tell it like it is, right? Yes?
I have a hard question for you, Carl. I did write up it's a hard question because failure is hard to predict.
Always.
You know, your car might have a problem and you know, but you don't know if it's going to take a day or 6 months before the thing dies. And
Right.
It's hard to predict failure. The thing that annoys me, like the thing about healthcare, that one line that all the plans being canceled weren't real insurance, that annoys you. The line that annoys me is that we're leaving this federal debt as a huge burden for our children and our grandchildren. I hear that all the time. I don't necessarily believe it. I mean, our debt as a percentage of what income the government is taking in is like already way beyond what anybody would lend anybody. And
Right.
it's growing. So, I mean, I think we're already in trouble. Have you done any calculations or any hard look, and I know this is hard, as to when the wheels are going to come off? When people will stop lending to the U.S. in a currency or other various things happen?
Well, the common chestnut is that we have the biggest military in the world, and so our, you know, and I've used this line myself, the United States Treasury is backed by 6,000 nuclear weapons and very little else, okay? The truth is a little more complicated. U.S. Treasury debt is, for the most part, backed by your willingness to get up and go to work tomorrow. Because when you do that, you pay taxes, directly and indirectly, on everything you do, on all of your economic activity. So here's the real question. When do the wheels come off? When you stay in bed, when you pick up a bottle of whiskey and you, collectively, all of us, okay, say, here's the middle finger, Uncle Sam, you can't tax what I don't earn, and I'm going to evade legally as much of it as possible, and you can go to hell because I'm not getting anything of value for what you're doing. All right? Now, I mean, there are people that are already doing this to some extent. All right? I'm an entrepreneur. That's what I've done my entire life, one form or another. I will not start another business. Not as long as this is going on. I could tomorrow. I have several business plans that I've written over the last 5 years. They're sitting in a drawer. They're never going to come out. How many people would they employ? I don't know. A couple of them would probably fail. I had 3 businesses that failed before I got the one that worked with the internet company. All right? So, I mean, I could have several that don't work. That's the way most people have it happen. But those people will get a salary until that happened, right? And if I had another one that was a big success, well, how much economic activity has been avoided there? I don't know.
We are seeing some of them in the disability level.
Well, and yeah, and the thing is you've got people that are gaming, and then you have people that have chosen consciously to game the system to the maximum possible extent. They can work, but they're on disability. The government's not doing anything about it. And the reason for that is quite simple. If they crack down on it, now these people have no income, and guess what? Now the GDP goes down. Remember, the key for all of these people, all these talking heads, all these guys in Washington, D.C., that number can never go down. Right? They don't care how fake it is.
Ultimately, how wealthy we are depends on how much goods and services we produce,
right?
Not how much of it we consume.
That's right.
They seem to have it backwards.
Of course, they have it backwards. There is this obsession with Keynes and supply-side economics. It doesn't work. It has never worked. Okay? okay?
If our job was to consume, we could all stay home and they could send us money and we could just...
Did you see Wall-E?
But somebody stopped saying...
You guys all saw Wall-E, right? The cartoon movie? The Disney cartoon movie, right? The guys are so fat they can't get out of the chairs. Riding around chairs, flashed on the billboard, consume, and they're sucking down these shakes. Everything. How far are we from this, okay? I mean, look at, where is our industry that we used to have? We were the industrial capital of the world, right? It's gone. How long does it go on? Well, until the people decide they've had enough. I mean, look, if we want to send all of our tradecraft jobs off to China and Indonesia and everywhere else, and we don't want to manufacture anything over here, and we just want to sit there and suck down McDonald's hamburgers and milkshakes and take first you have a 5-year loan to buy a car, right? Then 2 years into it, you don't like it anymore because it's not quite as shiny as it used to be. So you trade it in and you get a 6-year loan, you roll over the negative amortization on the first one into the second one, and you keep doing this, so you get out 8, 9 years. And at some point this ends, you can't do it anymore. Nobody will finance it. But do we really have to go to the point that we actually literally run ourselves into a granite wall before we stand up and say we've had enough of this? Maybe so.
Politically, quite possible.
Yeah, maybe. But that's where we're headed for if we don't cut this out. And the thing is that, from a political perspective, if we take on, here's the ugly little reality with the healthcare situation. If you fix the healthcare system in this country, healthcare is over $2 trillion a year of spending between federal, state, local, and private spending. Okay? $16 trillion economy, over $2 trillion of it is healthcare. If you fix the healthcare monopoly problem, and all you got to do is do two things. You pass a 2-line bill that says the Sherman and Clayton Acts apply to all insurance and medical commodity and supplies and all medical related firms, period. Okay, I don't care what it is, pharmaceutical, the whole shebang, everything.
No price.
All right? If you get caught doing it, you go to prison. That's it. It's $10 million fine, 10 years in the slammer, end of discussion, it's over. The price of medical care in this country would collapse by 80% in an afternoon. Now, would there be things you couldn't get anymore? Yes. For most people, yes, there would. Okay? There would be miracles that we do today that nobody can afford that you couldn't have.
Yeah, they'd be the things way on the end of the bell curve.
On the far end of the bell curve, there would be people that would get hurt by this. All right? I'm not going to lie to people and say there wouldn't. There would. But for the majority of people, your health care would improve dramatically. You'd be able to pay for it. And even if you were poor, you could pay for expensive things like cancer treatment because it wouldn't be that much. Could you come up with $900 to have a baby even if you're poor? Over 9 months? Yeah, probably, right? It's $100 a month, right? How many people that are poor eat garbage, drink $100 of beer a month, or smoke $100 worth of cigarettes? Most of them, right? All right, I mean, let's face it, this is reality, all right? Guess what? If you took I have a